Welcome.
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 Welcome to the unlikely
Seminarian.
Welcome to the Unlikely Seminarian.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Unlikely Seminarian podcast. I'm your host, Dan Cook, and thanks as always for listening. So in this 3-episode arc, we've been talking about complementarianism and egalitarianism. The notion that men and women are created equal in the eyes of God, but that perhaps there are certain gifts that are meant for men and other gifts that are meant for women, or the view that says that when it comes to spiritual gifts, gender is irrelevant. So this is the part where I have to kind of admit where I come down on this, and I fall pretty squarely in the egalitarian camp. And I'll say this, I have a lot of respect for my complementarian brothers and sisters. I respect that there is a very logical and deeply held belief in complementarianism that they possess, and that they have a right to. I disagree with the conclusions, but I understand where they're coming from, and I respect their right to feel that way, and I hold no animosity towards them for holding that view. And I think it's important to say that right out of the gate. If we don't acknowledge that seemingly opposite views can in some way, shape, or form hold validity, then there's no conversation to be had. And without conversation, there's no middle ground to be found. And without middle ground to be found, there is no unity for the church to find. And since we are called to be one body of Christ, that's a problem. So I think we have to start by understanding that those who disagree with us have that right and aren't doing so out of malice and aren't doing so out of ignorance, that there is a very scholarly and biblical way to approach the relationship between men and women in the church from a complementarian point of view. Again, I happen to disagree. So why? Why do I disagree? Partially because of the biblical text. I think there are both very clear passages that make it obvious that women were involved in Jesus' ministry, that women remained involved in the ministry of Christians after Jesus' death, that even the passages from Paul, which would seem to indicate that women are to occupy subservient roles, are counterbalanced by other passages from Paul, which make women seem to have participated in a very equal status with men. More than that, or I shouldn't say more than that, because the biblical evidence is critically important. In addition to the biblical evidence for an egalitarian point of view, I think the biblical evidence that would be used to support a complementarian point of view has problems, or at the very least explanations. We know that there are timeless teachings in the Bible. We also know that there are teachings that were very much for a specific time and place. Anybody who wants to argue that need only go back to the Old Testament, especially Leviticus, and see all of the strictures that were listed there and ask themselves how many of those they still follow today. There are lines of demarcation. So we know that not all teachings are universal in their nature. The trick becomes looking at these passages that are cited as complementarian passages and trying to understand if there is a context to them, a time and place-ness to them, that explains why in a certain context that passage would be reasonable, but that it doesn't make it necessarily a universal passage or a universal commendation. I'll give just one example. We'll go back to that passage from 1 Timothy. This is one that gets used over and over and over and over again. I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. So is that a universal teaching, or is that a specific time and place teaching? I would argue, egalitarians would argue, that that is very much a time and place teaching. Because at the time that Paul's writing this letter to Timothy, Timothy is in Ephesus, working with the Christian church in Ephesus. In the city of Ephesus, the cult of Artemis was very much rooted in that community prior to the Christian church coming there, and well after the Christian church had been established. Artemis was a Greek goddess, and the cult of Artemis was mainly run by women. And so women held very important cultural roles in the city of Ephesus as priestesses of Artemis. And what Paul's concern is, in many of these churches, not just in Ephesus, but in many churches that he helped plant, there tends to be, especially early on, a blending of Christian teaching with their prior faith, usually a pagan faith of some sort. Could be heavily Greek influence, could be heavily Roman influence, but it was basically pagan in nature. And what Paul's concerned with is that the gospel, Jesus' gospel, will be watered down by pagan leaders. That there'll be some sort of combination that tries to happen between teachings of Jesus and of Christianity and between the formerly held pagan beliefs. That there will be leaders that think that in order to win folks to Christianity, you have to give a little bit and say, hey, look, but there's this paganness to it. And Paul's trying to say, no, there is no pagan nature to Christianity. You have to put off the old self and take on this new self. So that's kind of Paul's concern when he says, I won't let women teach. The egalitarian view on that passage is that he won't let women teach in Ephesus because he doesn't want priestesses of the cult of Ephesus to try blending their religion with Christianity to make it more palatable. And if you go through bit by bit by bit, passage by passage by passage, you can find various ideas that explain why perhaps those either aren't timeless passages, or aren't universal teachings, or have very specific contexts. That's one reason. The other reason that I fall in the egalitarian camp comes strictly from my life experience. I know too many women that are strong leaders. I know too many women that are amazing preachers. I know too many women who, in positions of authority, do amazing, amazing work, to believe that arbitrarily they should be limited in their authority, in their headship, based on the fact that they're female. I've just seen too much of it. I've seen it in my church. I've seen it in other churches. I've seen it in the seminary. The head of the program that I'm in, the online program that I'm in, is a female, and she's an amazing professor, an amazing leader. I'm not just saying that because she gave me a good grade. It's just in my lived experience, I have seen too many times women exhibit excellent leadership skills, excellent leadership ability, to believe that arbitrarily because they're women, they should be in these subservient roles. So I think there's biblical evidence, and I think there's lived experience evidence that leads me to believe in an egalitarian point of view. Why is it important to find middle ground? Why is it important for each side to understand and accept the validity of the opinion of the other? Again, it goes back to this idea of unity. The church is supposed to be one body under Christ. And if we don't start finding ways for folks in camps like these to come together and find middle ground, that unity doesn't ever happen. Plus, I don't believe in false binaries. In fact, I don't like binaries at all. There's too much polarization in this world altogether. It has completely destroyed civil political discourse in the United States. You're either left or you're right. You're liberal or you're conservative. You're this position or you're that position. There is no commonality. There is no middle ground. If one side takes one position, the other side automatically has to take the other. And each side thinks the others are a group of blithering idiots who have no clue what they're talking about. It has destroyed political civility in this country. What I fear is that it will destroy religious civility in this country and perhaps around the world. I want to engage my brothers and sisters that think differently on this topic that I do. I want to embrace them. I want to understand where they come from, why they believe how they do, and see what value there is in their point of view for me to learn from. Because I've talked about recently, the moment you think you've got this all figured out, be it about Jesus or about anything to do with Christianity, the moment you think you've got your arms completely around a topic, you know what you think, you know what it is, you're good, you're ready to go, you have failed. There's always depths to plumb. There are always layers to peel back. There are always new ways to look at something. There are always new lessons to be learned. And as soon as you stop trying to do that, your faith starts to die. And if your faith starts to die, if too many of us have our faith start to die, then the church starts to die. I have reasons for believing what I believe, just as my complementarian brothers and sisters have reasons for believing what they believe. And I think it's vital that we understand each other It's vital that we engage each other. It's vital that we embrace each other and learn from each other for the growth, the health, and the future of the church. And I think I go back to the first episode of this 3-episode arc, that middle ground is understanding the historical context. If we can agree that many of these complementarian passages, that many complementarian viewpoints in the Bible stem from the fact that in the times that those passages were written, it wasn't even a consideration that a woman would have authority. It wasn't even a consideration that a woman would have power. Those women that helped Paul, that Paul referenced in various letters, it was a completely radical and unbelievable notion at that time in history that a woman would occupy a space like that. And even those women would assume that if you were talking about those in power, you were 99 times out of 100 talking about men. So if we understand the historical context, if we understand that one of the points of Christianity, that one of the ways in which we follow Jesus is to set aside authority, is to lay down power, is to take our power and give it away to others in order to empower them, then when you're writing about that and you're talking about that in a first century context, you're talking about men. Because men were the ones with the authority. Men were the ones with power. If we can agree on that, as complementarians, as egalitarians, now we have a starting point to say, okay, that's a different perspective that I hadn't considered. That's a different way of looking at some of these passages. Let's talk about that. And let's talk about what's different today in 2018 than in the first century. And how do we contextualize those passages using good exegesis? How do we then contextualize those passages so that they're applicable today? These are the kinds of conversations that need to be had between complementarians and egalitarians for the benefit of the unity of the church. Comments, thoughts? Send an email. unlikelyseminarian@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you have to say. I'm Dan Cook, and you've been listening to The Unlikely Seminarian.